Hello and welcome to another episode of Autogefühl. Today with me, AJ and Jonas. This weekend we are here in New York and we get to drive the all-new, first ever BMW X3M. But not only that, this is the X3M Competition. But it gets even better because we have with us the X4M Competition as well. So I'm really excited to see what these SUVs are capable of. I know you are as well. So strap in, because here we go. Let's start off by taking a look around the outside of these two SUVs. Up front, the X3 and the X4M Competition look pretty much identical. Of course, there are the quick telltale signs that these are the M Competition. For example, the glossy black kidney grille in the front, as well as this very aggressive bumper on both of these SUVs. The lights, by the way, start at with LEDs as standard, but you can also upgrade them to the adaptive LEDs like the ones we have here. I mean, the front is very aggressive, but Brian made an interesting observation just to kind of highlight how cohesive BMW's design language is, not just across the SUVs, but also across their entire range. If you were to just kind of cover up, with if you're watching on your phone, put your finger and try to on the screen and cover up the bottom part of the bumper and just look at the top half. It kind of looks exactly like a 3 Series or a 5 Series. So I really like how BMW maintains that cohesive design language. As we take a closer look, you'll also notice that there's very large openings throughout the entire front grille and the bumper. All of these are open intakes. We see a lot of cars nowadays with a very elaborate front grille and bumper, but a lot of it is blocked off. But not in this case. You can see through here to the radiators, the coolers, and you can also see the cross-member brace through the front grille. And that's because this debuts the all-new S58 3-liter inline-6 turbo petrol engine, and we'll take a detailed look into that later on. Both of the X3, X4M Competition are 2.14 meters wide, and they weigh about 1,970 kilograms. The X3 and the X4 start showing their differences when you look at them side by side, as we do now. First of all, the X3 is 4.72 meters long, and the X4 is 4.76 meters long. So a little bit longer, and of course, the roofs are very different. We'll get to that in a minute. But let's start off at the front. By the way, the standard M comes with the 20-inch rims, but you can get the 21 inches with the M Competition, like the one we have here. They come as standard. Of course, there are upgraded brakes, ventilated and drilled. The X4 and X3 Competition also come with the the advanced sports exhaust, which sound really nice. Some more M Competition elements, like for example this rear view mirror. It is of course covered with a glossy black casing, but the top is not connected, so it gives a very aerodynamic, very cool styling effect. Some more styling effects over here with the badging. These are purely cosmetic, but again, makes it more athletic. Some other things to make these cars feel more athletic, as you can see down here at the bottom of the door, you also have like a skirt, And the wheel arches, while they are squared off to still, retain that SUV stance of the X3 and the X4Ms, they are in the body color, and this kind of visually brings the mass of the SUV lower to the ground, and again makes them seem a little bit more athletic. You also have a glossy black roof railing to also kind of, give some more differentiation and contrast to the side profile and the glossy black window frame. As we go to the X4, of course, you will notice that there is a very large difference as you start coming past the B-pillar. The roof starts sloping downwards in this coupe-like fashion. With the M Competition, you also have these really cool spoilers on the top of the roof, but along the bottom as well. With the X4, you also have a black, smaller spoiler on the boot lid. What do you guys prefer? I mean, I think this looks a little bit more athletic, but subjectively, I'm not so sure that I personally like an SUV coupe styling, but let me know in the comments below. By the way, the color is called the Donington Grey, and this car's color is called the Toronto Red. Now, while the X4 is a few centimeters longer, the wheelbase of the two cars, and of course the entire platform and the chassis and the drivetrain are all identical. But of course, the rear is also where they stand out and have their own individuality. The back of the X3, we see this, again, M Competition-esque rear spoiler, but a very regular, very clean design for the rear hatch. Horizontal tail lamps, three-dimensional, a little bit smoky effect. Of course, there's cameras on the front, in the rear, and on the wing mirrors to provide a top-down 360-degree view, and I'll show you that once we're inside. We can see the camera for the rear over here. Of course, the very important X3M Competition badging, very bold, very sexy, right at the back. Further down, a pretty interesting looking diffuser, and of course that upgraded advanced sports exhaust system that I told you the competitions have. You can see the two quad pipes, the quad pipes, two on each side, very large, and they sound great, and we'll show you that in a minute as well. Diverting our attention now to the X4, we do see that, the two haunches for the roof spoiler, kind of similar to what we saw there on the X3 over here as well, but it's a little bit more subtle and subdued. But there's an additional black glossy lip spoiler on the back of the boot lid. X4M Competition badging over here. The tail lamps are also very different. I mean, just looking at these two side by side, this is a lot more narrower, very horizontal, wrapping around the edges of the side of the car. This is still a bit more vertical, a bit more broad, I would say. But going further down, the camera is also placed lower down here as compared to the X3. But the lower section is, again, fairly identical with the diffuser and the quad pipes. We wanted to show you another color for the X4, so we've brought along the Sophisto Gray. So now let's take a look in the trunk of these two SUVs. I'm going to open this X3 as well. So of course they both have the automatic tailgate. The X3, the boot space with the seats up is 550 liters, and if you put the seats down, it's 1,600 liters. Whereas the X4 has 525 liters, and with the seats down is 1,430 liters. So yes, with the seats up, there's not much difference, but of course, because of that roof line, there is a little bit of height that you're losing out. So Jonas, let's come over here and start taking a detailed look at the X3. Pretty flat loading lip. There is absolutely no lip at all, actually, and you have these scuff plates to make sure that you don't damage your bumper when you're hauling your suitcases over. Below this, you have some more extra storage and a repair kit. There are these really nice railings on either side, which you can kind of use these movable anchor points to strap down any loose items that you may want to on either side. Some more hooks on either side, a cubby hole with a net over here, switches to tumble the seat. As you can see, it tumbles in a 60-40 fashion. And you have a parcel shelf as well, which can be fixed here, can retract, and also you can remove it altogether quite easily. In addition, there's also a 12-volt power socket. So it's a very usable loading area, and because of this height that you get with the standard boxy SUV roof, it's a lot more versatile as well. But now let's take a look at the X4. Straight off the bat, you'll notice the split in the parcel shelf, because of course that sloping roof line means that it cannot be one singular piece. But you can also remove this if you don't want to, but the rest of it remains more or less the same. Again, extra storage, repair kit. This also clicks, it's really cool, look at this. So extra details and quality like that always makes me happy. The same railings to anchor down and tie down items. Also more anchor points down here. Again, similar cubbyhole area, a similar 12-volt power socket, and as well as being able to tumble the seats in a 60/40 fashion. And as you can see, they do lie very flat, so you can haul large items. I mean, with the seats down, there is not much difference in terms of sheer volume, the number between the X3 and the X4, but certainly because of that sloping roofline, you do lose out some versatility. All right, let's take a look under the hood and see what powers this beast. Pneumatic struts, so I don't have to lift it on my own. Padding on the top as well. So there's a lot to talk about this engine. We will take a detailed look in a minute, but before we start with that, I also want to mention that with the M Competition for the X3 and the X4, you also have a lot of these cross braces and strut bar to improve the rigidity. So for example, we saw the cross members in the front, and you could see through the front of the grille over here, but also you can see cross members over here and the strut bar across the strut towers on the top. So what are these things? How are they useful? What's the point? Well, the truth is the hood, what you see here, is just a placeholder. It's just there to cover up this large opening. So are the doors and the hatch. So this is a monocoque construction. There is no ladder frame. So what that means is the entire body is in charge of maintaining rigidity. Now the roof also plays an integral part in that. Trust me, I know. I drive a Cabrio every day. It's like a floppy noodle. But the roof is providing rigidity in this central cell of the car. But in the front, there's a large hole right through the middle. And what that means is, as you can see, this is the McPherson strut for the front suspension. So this tower is in charge of, holding and keeping rigid the front left wheel, and that is in charge of keeping and retaining rigidity of the right front wheel. Now at high speeds, if you're on a racetrack and you hit the curb on one wheel, let's say this wheel, there's a very sharp force acting upwards on this strut over here. Now because there is no member, or there is no connection on the top, and it's just a hole, the actual front of the the front of the monocoque can actually start twisting a little bit. There can be deflection, and that means that the alignment of the wheels are also being negatively affected. Now this also can happen if you're going at high speed and hit a pothole, and there's a lot of shock that gets transferred, and that can start twisting it. Because again, the front bumper is just not a structural member, because it's also just there to fill up the space with all of the lights and so on. So for high performance vehicles, what we generally see, and what we see here, is that they add these extra cross members like this, and of course the strut bar across the tower, the top of the towers on the front two struts, and this allows the shock to be transferred across the bar to both strut towers, and that way retain more rigidity in the front axle. So again, these small details might not seem like a big deal, but it's always that last tenth, that you want to that you always try to push and make the car faster. So that's that. The engine. Oh boy, a lot to talk about this as well. So I drove the M40i back when it was launched. I think it was September of 2017. Make sure you watch that video. And I really loved that engine. The M40i had the B58 engine, which is a 3-liter inline-6 twin-scroll turbo petrol engine, which made 360 horsepower and I think about 500 newton meters of torque. Now this, for the new X3M and X4M competition, and the standard M as well, they have completely revised the B58 engine, and now it's an all-new engine that they're calling the S58. It is still a 3-liter inline-6 turbo petrol engine, but now it's not a twin scroll, it's a twin turbo itself. We'll take a very detailed look at this in a minute, I promise. But it uses a lot of revisions, some new manufacturing techniques, just optimizations in every little corner that they could possibly find. And now the S58 makes 510 horsepower here in the M competition, and still a very healthy 480 horsepower, or PS, technically metric horsepower, in the standard X3, X4M. It makes 600 newton meters of torque, and that starts at 2,500 RPM and has a plateau all the way to 5,500 RPM, roughly thereabouts. And it redlines at around 7,200 RPM. So, I'm really excited to put that engine to the test. That is coupled with a 8-speed torque converter automatic gearbox, again tuned by M Performance to be more responsive and sharp. Pretty interesting that they're still going with a torque converter and not a dual clutch. We'll see how that fares once we start driving. It's coupled with the X-Drive asymmetrical all-wheel drive system, but here again, tuned by M Performance to be more athletic and more agile, more rear wheel, more rear axle biased like we see in the M5. So still very drift happy, still very tail happy. Of course, adaptive M suspension with the dampers, which can be electronically adjusted individually at multiple times a second, and 4-piston brakes at the front and single-piston brakes at the rear with ventilated and drilled rotors. A lot of great hardware. A lot more to talk about the engine. We'll get to that in a minute. If you're wondering where I am, make sure you follow us on Instagram, because we always post sneak peeks, behind-the-scenes pictures, and stories where we ask you for your opinions, your questions, and we cater to them on the show. So be sure to subscribe. We even have some small mini episodes that are only on IGTV. So check it out. It's all for free and it's all for fun. So here we have the key for the X3 or X4M competition. You have the nice M stripes on the side. Very slick key, keyless entry. So if you lock it, keep it in your pocket, then come up, it unlocks automatically. The doors are already quite different between the two cars, between the X3 and the X4. So the X3, again, because of the more upright body style of the SUV, the door is also a little bit more taller. I mean, the window is also a little bit larger as well. The door has very nice materials, plush materials on the top. This carbon fiber inlay along the top with the glossy polish, a aluminium inlay below that. Really nice materials, really solid build quality, more plush materials down here. This also comes with the Harman Kardon sound system, which sounds really great, I can tell you that already. More plush materials down here for your arms, for the armrest, and of course hard plastics towards the bottom. The X3 and the X4M competition only come with real animal leather skin options. Unfortunately, you don't have any fabric or synthetic leather options. Getting inside is very easy. Tall body means tall door, and higher ground clearance means easier ingress. The seating position is completely adjustable. You can move your seats in various different ways. You can adjust the lumbar support, adjust the side bolstering amount for the backrest, and of course the steering wheel column can be adjusted for reach as well as rake. We will take a closer look at the steering wheel and the infotainment system because there's a lot to talk about that. But let's compare this right away with the X4. So, like I mentioned earlier, the door is a little bit shorter because already, if you notice, if you have to the keen eye, you'll notice that the roof is already a bit lower than in the X3. So that means that this door is a little bit shorter and this window is also a little bit smaller. Materials again are very similar, the same exact styling on the side, on the door. Different color here. This is more mocha chocolate-like shade rather than the slightly lighter shade that we had in the X3. Getting inside, again, I do have to tilt my head, as you'll notice, because this roofline is a little bit more sloping. So you have to be a little bit more careful when you get inside. But apart from that, again, the seating position is completely adjustable. Your controls and the entire dashboard is, again, identical. So no differences there. Same seat adjustment controls, etc. But yeah, the roof is a little bit shorter, and that sloping line also means that the windshield is a little bit more restricted as well. Just very minute changes, but changes nevertheless. But what's more important, of course, is the back seat. So let's work our way back here to the X3 and open the rear door. Here, of course, the roofline, as you can see, is still maintaining a very high and straight line. So the door is also very tall. Large window here and a small quarter window on the side as well. By the way, you also have a very useful sunshade that you can fix like that. Always nice to have this extra detail. The materials on the door in the rear are also very nice. So plush materials up here, carbon fiber, plush materials down here. So you're getting a lot of good materials and quality for your money. Getting inside, of course, is very easy. Tall door, as we know, and the ingress is also quite easy because of the taller body, the ground clearance. They both have the same wheelbase, like I mentioned earlier, so there is a little bit of a wheel arch that you have to kind of squeeze between, the door and the wheel arch, but it's not that bad at all. The seat is set to my driving position, like you saw. I'm 5'8" or 1.7 meters. Plenty of knee room, although the back of these sports seats are not really scooped out, but I fit here quite fine. The fixed head restraint also means that I can't really see, I have to peer along the sides of the seat, but otherwise I'm very happy, and thanks in part to this very large panoramic sunroof, which opens also quite a bit. So there's about 20% of it can be opened, and the remaining is very large. It goes even behind my head. And it doesn't really impede any of my headroom, as you can see, so there's still ample. That's another difference with the X4, and we'll see in a minute that the sunroof is also significantly smaller. The center seat, however, is not a seat that I would recommend for large adults. This bench is not that bad. There is enough cushioning. It is pretty comfortable. You do have a third climate zone with your own vents and a 12-volt power socket. And yeah, because of that panoramic roof, there's plenty of headroom, but you will have to struggle with your passengers for leg room for your feet. Another useful feature with these seats are that you can recline it just a couple steps, so not really too much, but it still gives you the ability to, find the most comfortable seating arrangement. Isofix points, which have hinges, so none of those popping covers where you will definitely lose. A very nice hinge, spring-loaded. In the middle, we have an armrest with cup holders, really nice as well. And yeah, you can also fold that down in the middle if you want to keep your skis. So, how does the X4 differ in the back? Let's take a look. Right off the bat, the door is again quite different because the roofline is already significantly lower. It's already dropping quite a lot more at this stage. So yes, this door is significantly shorter and the window is also significantly smaller. You can see here it's much smaller. It's so small that you don't even have a shade. So that's how small it is, like we saw in the X3. But again, materials are top-notch, the same as the front. Again, getting inside, I have to navigate this wheel arch, navigate this gap, and navigate my head by tilting it to get inside. So it is a little bit more compact back here. And of course, if I put my head all the way back, headroom is just about adequate. 5'8", 1.7 meters. My driving position, feet are very happy, enough leg room, enough knee room. But yeah, Thomas, even Jonas, you're quite tall. I don't think you would be quite happy to sit back here. And that panoramic sunroof that we saw, which extended behind my head in the X3, is already stopping right here. So I feel a bit claustrophobic, a little bit hemmed in because there's so much of black around me. The windows are small. The sunroof is already stopping here, so I have just the black headliner on top of me. So it is definitely, you're definitely sacrificing a significant amount of versatility and space in the back seat. But again, it depends on what your priorities are. If you're not going to be ferrying around 3 passengers all the time, then why do you need that? If you like the way it looks, definitely go for this. The interior of the X3 is very similar to the version that we've seen at launch. So that was launched back in the end of 2017. So the materials are really plush on the top. A very nice integrated design along the side of the door coming into the dashboard. Good materials here, an inlay of aluminum effect. And of course, that carbon fiber effect that we saw on the side of the door is also here in the middle. Damped glove box, which is lockable. Nice materials down here as well. But I think overall, to be very honest, I don't think this is very exciting. I think it's a little bit dated. Some of the new AMGs have a much more interesting design. I mean, it doesn't have to be outlandish. This is very classic. Of course, a very standard BMW with the floating display, the iDrive, very horizontal 10.25 touchscreen. We'll talk about this later on. But in my opinion, I think they could have really upped their game. This infotainment system we'll go into detail later, but there's some things that I think needs to be upgraded very quickly. But on the whole, it's okay. It's decent. It's simple. It's classic. But what's really interesting is the steering wheel. So as we look over this side, the steering wheel is the M Competition steering wheel, and I like the steering wheel a lot. It's quite simple, 3-spoke, very clean design, nice grip, a dual contrast stitching with blue and red along the edges. Actually, it's got a very nice grip, and because of the 8-speed automatic gearbox, you have the paddle shifters in the rear, just behind you, which turn with the wheel. Controls for your audio and telephony, heated steering wheel button over there for the adaptive cruise control on the left. But I'm sure you've already noticed the M1, M2, 2 toggle switches, the buttons up here. What do they do? Well, these are for the driving mode. Right now, as you can see in the cockpit, we're in the normal mode with the efficient for the engine, comfort for the suspension, and comfort for the steering wheel. But if I press the M1, now I'm in sport, sport, and sport for all 3 elements. And if I press M2, I need to confirm by pressing it again. And now it's in the Sport Plus mode for everything. The traction control is also limited. And the X-Drive is now the M-tuned X-Drive, which is what we see in the M5 already. Very much rear biased, but still can send power to the front if needed. So these buttons are really cool. It's a very quick way to turn on and off the different drive modes. You don't have to toggle through many switches. Now, the infotainment system to me is a little bit of a hit and miss. There was an opportunity, I think, that BMW missed where they could have really updated this. It's a system that we know and we've been using for a long time, but in comparison with some of the new systems that are coming out, I think it's starting to get a bit dated. Yes, it has some interesting features like gesture recognition. So the driver, for example, if I do this, I can mute and unmute the infotainment. I can turn the volume down, or I can turn the volume up. Sometimes it doesn't work, as you can see. But on the whole, I don't think it's a very useful feature anyway. It's more of a gimmick. But something that I don't like is here on the home screen. I would like to have a very nice combination of different information, Probably 60% of the screen should be my navigation. I want to see what's playing on the music. I want to see if there's any notifications on my phone, or any notifications for the weather, and so on and so forth. They achieve this with these tiles that you can, modify and customize in the location. But this is the only real estate that you have for the map in this kind of a way. There's so much of empty space and black that is just being wasted, I think. And that this kind of a screen can be optimized in a way that you have enough of the navigation, a little bit of the music, a little bit of your phone connectivity, notifications, and overall a nice home screen that you can modify, rather than these 3 tiles and so much of empty space. But regardless, the navigation is really intuitive, works really quick, very slick. You have different options for your vehicles. You can set up the heads-up display, by the way, which looks really nice and very useful. You also have the M heads-up display, which you can see here. Instead of just having the navigation and things like that, you have a much bigger rev counter, a speedometer, and the gear indicator. So more sporty, and you can modify that really easily. You can configure the individual M1, M2 driving modes, as you can see in terms of the DSC, the dynamic stability control, the MX drive, the engine response to the throttle inputs, the M dynamic damping system that this car has for the suspension and the chassis, and how much this car has a progressive steering rack, but the weight and the response and the feedback that is coming through the electromechanical steering rack can be adjusted. And of course, this 8-speed torque converter auto box, you can also tune to what level and to what degree it should be sharp and sporty. How long should it hold each gear rather than shift up. So these kinds of things can be configured. Unfortunately, as with standard BMWs, you have Apple CarPlay, but you don't have Android Auto. Let me try to see if I can find where that setting is for you guys. But this is, again, something that we've seen with some other manufacturers. It's a question of privacy and security, but you get Apple CarPlay, but you don't get Android Auto. This car also comes with a lot of assistance systems, as you can see. You can leave them all on, or you can configure them individually. I always like the animation that BMW has for these individual safety features, because they're really detailed. Like you can see here, for pedestrian warning, there's a child with a ball. For front collision alert, you can see that it changes to a car in front. Lane departure warning, and it also comes with steering intervention above 40 miles per hour, blind spot detection, and even here you can see the animation of the X3 also has its indicator lights on. So I really like these interesting little details. This also comes with steering intervention for blind spot detection and side collision warning. So plenty of assistance systems, and with this one quick button you can just turn all of them on, or you can keep some of them off if you don't want, like for example the steering intervention, which I'll tell you a little bit later, but is a little bit of a hit and miss anyway. Air conditioning vents, you don't have that extra little temperature slider that you used to get before, so it's just an automatic climate control. Some hotkey buttons down here that you can set up for different routes or different radio stations, things like that. Volume knob, seek, CD, eject, dual zone climate control for the front passengers. There's a third zone in the rear as well, and of course the buttons for that. Heated and ventilated seats in the front, which is nice. So for cold days and hot days on the racetrack, when you start getting really sweaty, ventilated seats are very useful. As we go further down around the center console, another interesting detail that you find in the M and the M Competition are these pads along the sides of the center console, because when you're driving on a racetrack, you're going to be smashing your knee against the sides, and that shouldn't hurt you. So these are padded, little padded elements along the side. X3M Competition inside, just in case you forgot what you were driving. Slider to reveal a wireless phone charging port down here with a USB power socket. A little cubby hole here perhaps to keep some coins. 2 beverage holders, with adaptive clamps, so depending on the size of the bottle, they will clamp down. 12-volt power socket. The iDrive control console, which has touch recognition. It's a rotary dial. It's also doubles as a joystick, and you have hotkey buttons all around for your media, your communication, to jump to the main menu, map, navigation, so on and so forth. Over here we have the gear lever for the 8-speed automatic transmission. Already you have some controls to vary the driving mode. So, like for example, here you can see the button for the gearbox. So if you want it to be more economical or sporty or sport plus, you can already adapt that here to make your own individual setup. The parking button is down here. I really don't like that because it's a bit fiddly to use, and you might knock some of these buttons on, or I don't know. I would have liked the older versions where the parking button was on the top, but it's a pretty cool gear stock anyway, but it's, again, just digital. Traction control off button, and here you have some more options for your setup. You can individually change the engine to sport or sport plus rather than being in efficient mode. Same for the suspension and steering. You can individually change these parameters. You also have a button up here to turn on and off the sports exhaust, so it sounds pretty nice when it's on, so you probably want to leave it there. The hill descent control over here, electronic parking brake, and this car also has a top-down 360-degree view camera. So Jonas, if you press the brake pedal really quick and hold it there, if I put it in reverse, you will see that you have a top-down degree camera and of course a larger view out towards the rear. Really useful when you want to navigate in tight city spaces. You can also see it shows you to what extent the doors will swing out when you're parked, so you can make sure that if you have kids in the back seat, you park in a way that you wouldn't ding the doors of people you're parked next to as well. All these little touches and details, I really like this system. There's a nice center armrest. It's really long, quite wide, and padded pretty well. You can open it up, and there's a large cubby hole down here as well with a rubber lining so that you can drop your phone in and it won't get scratched. There's also a small LED light here so that it's easy to find items in the dark, and a USB charging port. First thing, before we get to the road, before we talk about the car and how it's to live with, you gotta start with the M Competition out on the racetrack. That's where it's meant to be, that's what it's born to do. And we are here in Monticello, just a couple hours outside of New York City. So, and I have with me the X4M Competition. So the first thing I want to do is hit this red button over here which says M2, and it says confirm, which means I am in charge now because the stability control and the traction management is now in dynamic mode. And also the transmission is completely in manual. The engine is also in Sport Plus mode. The suspension, the M suspension, is also in Sport Plus mode. The steering right now is in the comfort mode because it's a little bit lighter. This is a very intricate circuit, but I can go here in the setup and also change it to Sport Plus without having to modify the entire driving profile. So there's another thing that also changes now with the M2 mode, and that is the heads-up display. Before you would have just the readout of the speed, and you would have your navigation details and no tachometer. But right now with the M mode, the M2 mode, the heads-up display has this really cool digital RPM gauge, like a tachometer, but more digital, as well as a gear position indicator and of course a speedometer. So with that said, let's kick it down and let's push forward. The engine sounds really nice. The steering also is very heavy now. It gets more and more heavier as you go up the different driving modes from comfort to sport and then sport plus. The seats are also pretty good. Like with most BMWs, they are a bit on the firmer side, but out on the racetrack like this, that definitely helps because it kind of keeps you in place a little bit better. This all-wheel drive system also means that it allows you to have a little bit of slip with the X-Drive, and the traction control being in a more dynamic mode, it allows for a little bit more slip, but still has, you know, the ability to throw power to the front and just pull you out of a corner safely. So this car helps you feel like a hero, even if you have, you know, not much experience or skill out on the racetrack, which, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, of course. Most people don't ever, you know, spend a lot of time on the racetrack, of course. So that way this car allows you to push it and have fun, but it's still smart enough to know when it needs to step in and help you out. The brakes are also upgraded brakes here for the M Competition. 4 pistons up front in the caliper in the front rotor, ventilated and drilled, of course. A single piston in the rear, but plenty of stopping power. Again, if you come in a bit hot into a corner, you have a choice. You can either hit the brakes hard and let the X-Drive torque vectoring front and active rear differential sort you out, or you can put your foot down and let the tail kick out a little bit and use that rotation to keep you pointed in the right direction. The gearbox, interestingly, is a 8-speed M-Steptronic, which is a torque converter Autobox. Now, there's different variations how you can set it up. In the sport mode, it's still a little bit, you know, on the slightly slower side. It's not terrible. It's not going to destroy the fun. But if you put it all the way in, you know, in Sport Plus mode, like I do right now, it's actually not that bad at all. It's quite responsive. It shifts up really well. It shifts down also pretty well. Lets you hold the throttle on this corner like this. But I don't know, somehow, maybe it's just because I know that it's a torque converter. I'm expecting it to be a little bit slow, and I'm ready to criticize it the minute it doesn't seem to be as responsive. But objectively, it's doing the job really well. And of course, these guys know what they're doing. So the reason for choosing the Steptronic torque converter rather than a dual clutch definitely has a lot of reason behind it. Part throttle on this long right-hander with a late apex lift a little bit. You can see that there is certainly quite a bit of body roll. I mean, it's inevitable. 1,970 kilograms. I mean, that is pretty hefty no matter how you look at it. And 510 horsepower from this 3-liter inline 6 is plenty to push it. The brakes are plenty as well. The X-Drive and for the chassis and the suspension are great, but at the end of the day, the center of gravity, the weight, it's just physics. You can't avoid it. You definitely do feel that. Actually, I could even go to say that the seats are also could have used a little bit more side bolstering. You know, I think I'm still being tossed around a little bit too much for my liking. But compared to other cars in this market, like say the Porsche Macan or the AMG GLC 63, both of which I've driven. I've also driven the M40i, which is the slightly more toned down regular version of this car. I think this car feels a little bit more athletic. It's a little bit more spirited. It's a little bit more athletic compared to the AMG, which feels like a sledgehammer, and the Porsche, which feels a little bit more clinical. The BMW is definitely more athletic. This progressive steering rack also means that even on a slightly tighter track, like here in Monticello, I don't really need to move from this position to shuffle my hands to get more lock. And honestly, with this X-Drive, you can control the car's rotation so well with the throttle. It's really fantastic. It's a lot of fun. Like right now, if I accelerate, it goes a little bit wide. If I let go of the accelerator, it dives into the corner so well. So with the combination of the steering and the throttle, you really have a great control. And now you can put your foot down, 120 miles per hour on the straight, hard on the brakes, really good confidence, really good brake feel as well. Up this blind crest into the chicane. Don't want to use the 2 curbs, they're a bit slippery and bumpy. Gently power on, shift up, run wide. Yeah, so in the Sport Plus suspension damping mode, it is very bumpy on the city streets and if you have bad roads, but out here on the racetrack, it really helps because Unfortunately, this car does need it because of its, higher ground clearance. And if you come across a tight hairpin like that, you can easily kick the tail out a little bit. Of course, if you want to have full control, you can turn the DCC off, the DSC off, but right now we just have it in MDM, which is the M dynamic mode. But again, with that four-wheel drive on this really off-camber left-hand turn, as you can see, the car is really leaning on its outside wheels, but because of that active differential and the xDrive asymmetrical all-wheel drive system, it's able to channel the power where it needs to go. This engine really is so spirited, revs really freely. Once you're up and moving, once you've put some steam into it, you don't ever drop below 2000 RPM anyway, so you're never gonna face any problems with turbo lag. So there's plenty of poke and punch right throughout the rev range. It revs really freely, hits that 7200 RPM red line. The M view also gives you a cool little shift up indicator if you're coming close to the red line, and then that way you can use that to help you improve your shifts. And I've been doing over 15-20 laps already in this car, in this specific car on this racetrack, on the full track, before we started filming. And I'm driving the same car now within minutes of that track session, and it's showing no signs of letting down anything. The tires still have incredible amount of grip. The brakes are still very, very responsive and have plenty of bite. As you can see, I shed that speed so easily. And the engine is really nice. And of course, M dynamic mode allows you to have a little bit of fun, as always. So I must say, if you're gonna go for a fast SUV, between the GLC AMG, the Porsche Macan, and the X3, this is definitely, I would say, probably the most spirited. The Porsche Macan is a little bit more comfortable. I think the suspension is also dialed in very well for somebody who wants to have the ability to turn the car down, go from Mr. Hyde to Dr. Jekyll. So that split personality I was talking about earlier, it has a better ability to achieve that. The AMG GLC somehow feels a lot more brute, and that's probably part of, that's how they want it to be as well. That's kind of the image that AMGs have. They're large sledgehammers. They're not really meant for precision. Of course, they are very capable machines on the racetrack, but this somehow feels like it's born to do this. The M Competition specifically, the 600 Newton meters, the 510 horsepower, and just coupled with this great chassis. As far as SUVs go, it's really trying to show off that it doesn't hold it back and it can compete with the sports cars. Alright, so we know that the X4 and the X3M Competition are firecrackers out on the racetrack, but let's be honest, even if you do get one of these cars, you're probably not going to be driving it on the racetrack that often. So what really matters is its everyday mannerisms out on the open road, and of course once in a while when you do get to take it on some nice twisty roads, that's where it should really be fun and be easy to live with. So let's start off driving down this interstate that we are heading down towards New York City. The road surfacing is not the best right here, so it's also a good opportunity for us to kind of test how comfortable this X3M Competition or the X4M Competition would be. For all practical purposes, let's keep in mind that since the X4 and the X3 have the same chassis and drivetrain and suspension, you can draw the same conclusions for the driving behavior for both of them. So I'm going to set the adaptive cruise control. There's a button here to activate that, and I will set it to 55 miles per hour, which is the speed limit. Now the car is of course maintaining that speed, but also checking the distance with the car in the front, which I can decide what it would be a safe distance to maintain, and it will slow down if the car in front of me slows down, and speed up again to restore that speed that I set when that car pulls away. In addition, like we saw earlier on when we were going through the infotainment, there is the steering intervention. So you can turn it on with this button, and now it will intervene when you are going maybe slightly out of the lane, like right now, and will keep you planted in the middle, but it only works, for about a few seconds at a time when you don't have your hands on the wheel. So it does require you to hold the wheel at all times, which is the safe way to do it anyway. The car has 3 driving modes preset, but you have so many different variables that you can set. So right now I'm running the engine in efficient mode, so it's trying to be as frugal as possible. It's trying to coast and things like that. The suspension, the damper is also in the comfort mode, which means it's a little bit more supple, and it will try to absorb more of the undulations in a much more compliant manner. The steering is also in comfort mode, which means it's fairly light. It holds the line a lot more easily, so it's not so sharp to jump back to dead center. And also the gearbox is also in its more eco setting, so it shifts up a lot sooner. The upshifts and downshifts are also much more gentle and gradual, and they're not as abrupt. So in this way, right now, it is a very comfortable car. It does really seem like the X3 and the X4M Competition have a split personality, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Right now it's in Dr. Jekyll mode, it's quiet, it's composed. I can barely hear that engine. So of course when you want to hear it, and trust me, you're going to want to hear it a lot, you can turn on the sports exhaust here with this button, drop it down a few gears, put it in the M Sport mode, and then let it start crackling to life and enjoy that. But when you don't want to, right now, you can see that it's so quiet. I can barely hear the engine. It's also ticking over at a very low RPM. That way you're also getting pretty good mileage. We'll come back to the mileage a little bit later on. I just reset the trip meter right now. So it's still saying about 10 liters for 100 kilometers, but I'm sure we can get much better numbers, and we'll keep an eye on that throughout the review. On the other hand, in terms of comfort, the suspension is a little bit of a hit and miss, I would say. While it is definitely not uncomfortable or unbearable, it is still a little bit on the stiffer side nevertheless, and some of the more bigger potholes or some of the bigger undulations are felt a little bit more prominently than I would have liked, and perhaps than the standard M40i would. But it's not something that you can't live with. It's not that terrible. It's just a little bit on the firmer side than usual. The sound insulation is also really nice. There's not much of wind noise that gets filtered in. There's not much of the traffic noise that gets filtered in either. So the acoustic damping is also really nice. The materials throughout the cabin are also really, really well made and very plush. So this also helps make the car feel a lot more refined and just a very pleasant, quiet place to be. No buzzing, no rattling, no droning sounds. The tires are also very quiet. There's very little tire noise coming into the cabin as well. So overall, in terms of the acoustic damping, it's doing a really great job. Then in terms of the seat, well, generally I also find that BMW seats are also on the firmer side. And while that's great when you're on the racetrack, with these knee pads on the center console, and if you inflate the side bolstering, it really holds you in place. You don't have to make yourself rigid, and that way you're not compromising your handwork and your feet work. That's great. But on the flip side, when you're out on the road on a long drive, it is very supportive, but I would have liked a little bit more of a softer seat. And this is something that we generally know, that we notice with BMW cars quite often, is that they tend to have a little bit firmer padding in the cushions. But on the whole, it's definitely comfortable. It's definitely a car that I could see myself living with on a daily basis, not having to, run it at full throttle with, we don't have to turn the taps on. You can let it be calm and enjoy the drive. The visibility is also really great. Here in the X3, certainly, because the windshield is also more upright and it comes a little bit higher, so good visibility out forward. Taller windows on the side, and that way there's more visibility out the side. And when you turn your head to the side, the B-pillar is also just about just probably in line with your head, so it's not obstructing your view that much either. The panoramic sunroof also helps bring in light and make the car feel a lot more airy and spacious. The large window in the rear also has a good visibility out the back, and the large rear view mirror also enables you to see very easily. So in the city as well, it's very easy to maneuver this car in tight spaces. The A-pillars are also not that large and not that intrusive. They are a little bit further away. They're about an arm's length away from me. So that means that, I do have to kind of peer around them from time to time. There is a bit of a blind spot, but it's not unbearable. It's not something that, would really get on your nerves too much. So all that being said, I think in the city, with the cruise control, on the open road with the cruise control in the comfort settings, this is a very calm and peaceful way to cover many miles. I found some twisting roads here in the forests, so I think it's a good place for us to try to put the X3M through its paces and see what it can do. I'm going to turn off the lane keeping assist because while that works fairly well, the lane intervention, the steering intervention for the lane departure warning doesn't work that well all the time, as I've noticed. So I'm going to go into my driving assistance systems and go into individual, where I've turned off the steering intervention. So now I'm in charge completely of the steering. But I think that's also great because when you're driving sporty, you don't want to suddenly feel false feedback from the steering trying to correct you, because anyway, you're focusing. So next thing, I'm going to put it into M, and now the whole car setup has changed. The engine responds a lot more sharper. The suspension is in the sports setting, so it's definitely a lot more stiffer and firm. The steering is also a lot more heavier. It gives me more feedback. The gearbox is also holding each gear for a longer time, allowing the engine to build up all that boost and keeping me in that nice meaty torque band to get all that punch. So there's only one thing left to do. Slow down, make sure there's not much traffic around me, make sure it's safe to do so, and then shift down and then put my foot down. Wow, holy smokes, that was quick. This engine is really so lively. There is a little bit of turbo lag, just about, a little bit. It's still noticeable when you're on full throttle, below 2000 RPM, but once it gets going after 2500 RPM, that's when that torque kicks in, and really, you put your foot down and there's just instant shove. The engine sounds great. You can turn on the active sports exhaust, and now it's a lot more vocal and sonorous. It's a lot more louder, and that also helps you enjoy the drive, and you feel the sensation of speed a lot more. The paddle shifters are also really responsive. Not as responsive, unfortunately, as something like a dual clutch would be, but nevertheless, it's really good. This X-Drive tuned with the M Sport, M Performance, really does mask the weight of the SUV so well. It also kind of, because it's rear axle biased, helps to generate some rotation in the car. The rear axle also has an active differential, which means that it can send more torque to the outside rear wheel and push the rear end of the car around. And also, being an asymmetrical all-wheel drive system, it can do torque vectoring for the front axle to kind of suck the front end into the apex of the corner. So all of this in combination means you can take these corners at speed and with confidence. The steering feedback is also much improved compared to the comfort mode. It's a little bit heavier, of course, but more than that, it's also giving me feedback, so I can feel where the front wheels are maybe starting to lose a little bit of grip if they are, and it gives me, a little bit of that hint that okay, I'm maybe getting closer to the edge of the traction. But on the whole, it's still very confidence inspiring. It's still very stable at dead center because it's progressive. So the more lock that I provide with the wheel that's when it gets sharper and sharper. So at center, it's still a fairly medium rack. So that's kind of a great combination. And I always like progressive racks over just a all-round, straight, linear, fast track, because that's not really that's safe for a daily driver, because it gets a bit unnerving at high speeds on the highway. But this engine, oh my God. I remember the M40i that I drove. I was really happy with it because, 360 horsepower isn't a lot. By today's standards, not at all. And the M40i is, of course, M Performance, but it's not the full M. So I was not expecting it to really have much more. And 360 horsepower, 500 Newton meters in that engine was plenty. And it was just such an athletic, lively engine. It was like a young athletic puppy. It was just really happy to see you, just jumping on you all the time, wants to play, just wants to egg you to kind of, go faster, go harder, and, just push yourself. And this engine just takes that to a whole new level. The steering also gets a little bit heavier as you go faster. This four-piston brake caliper also has really good bite. So if I were to hit the brakes like right now, has a good enough bite for you to feel confident. There's a single piston caliper in the rear, but I think it's efficient. And of course, these are all the M Performance parts. So always a brand you can depend on. If you drive like this, the mileage is not going to be good. Right now, it says 14 liters for 100 kilometers. I totally understand that, but I don't care. You wouldn't buy an M Competition model with mileage being your primary concern. Yes, it shouldn't be ridiculous. And on the highway, if you're using a very light throttle and you're, making smart decisions, you're not overtaking all the time, and you're planning your moves a little bit ahead of time, so that that way you can easily see numbers as low as 9 liters for 100 kilometers, and I think that's a very respectable number. But if you are driving like this, and you're gonna want to drive like this with this car, yeah, you're gonna have to be okay with that. You do feel a little bit of body roll, I will be honest, and the suspension, even though it is pretty firm right now, allows for a little bit of roll. Not necessarily a deal breaker, but it's expected, and it does have a bit of roll. But on rough roads, it does get uncomfortable in the sport mode with the suspension on the stiffer setting. I'm not even going into the Sport Plus mode. I'm saving that for the track. But even in the sport mode, it does get a bit jittery. So there's supposed to be children at play, so I'm going to slow down when we cross this little village here, and then we can pick it up again. Now I can tell you some more things about, for example, the seat. You can put the side bolstering to be a little bit more tighter, and in that way try to hold you in place a little bit better. And the paddle shifters work pretty well. There is a little bit of hesitation. Being a torque converter, it's not as snappy, bang, 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 as a dual clutch would be. But yeah, I think overall, the X3 or the X4M Competition really is a great sport SUV. Wow. Okay, I'm gonna go have some more fun. I told you guys I would show you an in-depth look at the new engine, and here it is. This is the S58. It's a completely new, revised version of the previous B58. It's a 3-liter inline-6 turbo petrol engine. So first of all, starting at the top in the cylinder heads, the cores are now 3D printed. This new manufacturing technology allows very complex geometric shapes in the cores of the cylinder heads, which provides more rigidity, strength, and lightness, and of course using less material and wastage, instead of casting and then machining it. As we go further down, as you can see, of course, it's also angled by about 20 degrees, as with most inline BMW engines. Some other new interesting features, for example, are the high-pressure injectors that you can see right here. So there's 2 of them, each of them catering to 3 cylinders each. While we're here, you can also see the two turbochargers. So the previous 3-liter B58 engine had one twin-scroll turbo, but now they've moved to two mono-scroll turbos. So this is the first turbo, which caters to cylinders 1, 2, and 3. You can also see the wastegate actuator here, which will allow the boost to be released, and that way maintaining the right amount of pressure throughout the rev range. Similarly, the second turbocharger is down here, also with its own wastegate actuator right up here. So in this way, you always have plenty of boost. We'll see how that fares once we're out on the road and if I feel any turbo lag, but so far so good. And up here you see a more revised airbox. This allows channeling much better, cooler air into the airbox for the engine. You can also see there's a large gap on the top. That's because in the engine bay, as we saw, there is the strut bar to provide rigidity, so that cuts across right on the top. So if we go all the way to the bottom, some other new interesting things, for example, is a completely revised oil sump and oil pump. Now, when you're driving really quickly, especially on a racetrack, because of the lateral and longitudinal G-forces that comes with fast cornering and braking and acceleration, the oil inside the oil sump is getting sloshed around, it's getting moved around. And that means that sometimes there's not enough oil and not enough oil pressure to go and lubricate the entire engine. So therefore, the way these chambers are set up and the way the oil pumps are set up has to be different for high-performance machines. So they have done that to revise the amount of lubricant needed for the new engine. So overall, this engine, with all these advancements, now makes 600 Newton meters of torque between 2,500 and 5,500 RPM. And depending on the tune, it can make either 480 PS, that's metric horsepower, or 510 PS. Now, I'm pretty sure we're going to start seeing this engine in a lot more BMW M cars. BMW has partnered with Michelin to develop these bespoke tires for the X3 and X4M competition. So here we can see that, okay, it is based on the Pilot Sport 4S tire, but this little star at the end denotes that this is a very bespoke homologated special version of the tire for BMW. And what's unique about this tire? Well, if you can see, there are slightly different shades of color in the rubber. So there's a shade over here, you see there's a line up here, and then you see a different shade, there's a different shade here, and so on and so forth. Why is that? Well, actually, these are actually different compounds of rubber, and these are designed to do different things. So perhaps in the edge, this is a more harder compound to provide stiffness in the wall, which is essential for cornering. Here in the middle, it's a little bit more plush and compliant, so that when you're going down the highway in a regular daily use, there's a plushness in the ride. Some of these are more soft compounds to provide more grip in track conditions, where some of them are a little bit more stiffer. So overall, they're trying to use these different regions of the tire to have different strengths and weaknesses, and that way the overall tire, because it's a kind of a combination of these different elements, provides an all-round best case scenario for the X4M and the X3M. Let's summarize today's episode of the all-new, first ever BMW X3M Competition and the X4M Competition. By the way, the mileage that we saw towards the end of the drive, with a lot of highway driving in the eco mode, I was able to see numbers around 9 liters for 100 kilometers, which I think is very much acceptable for a car which has a 510 horsepower engine. So, the price for the X3M, the standard M, starts at around 85,000 euros. The X4 is always about 2,000 euros more. So the X4M is about 87,000 euros. If you want the competition, the X3M competition starts at 94,000 euros, and the X4M competition consequently starts at around 96,000 euros. And boy, that's pretty steep if you ask me. So what are you getting for that much money? Near as makes no difference, 100 grand. Is this car worth 100 grand? Well, let's talk about it. The engine, I think, is a firecracker of an engine. The X3M has 480 horsepower, which I think already is very good enough to haul this car around and really give you that exciting, sporty performance. But if you get the 510 horsepower, you're able to milk out every last ounce out of this engine. So yeah, it is a pretty great engine that you're getting for the money. The chassis as well, it's been fine-tuned by M Performance, so the adaptive dampers, the X-Drive, which is also a sporty X-Drive, rear-wheel biased, also provides a lot of dynamic fun. The M suspension also allows you to have a pretty comfortable ride, albeit it is still on the stiffer side in the end. And because of this, the geometry in the suspension linkages, the turning circle is a bit wide. But I think overall, due to the compact dimensions of this SUV, you will find it fairly easy to navigate within the city. So I think the package itself is really appealing. Some of the things I didn't like and I wish they could have done a little bit better, for example, would be the infotainment screen. I think they need to upgrade this a little bit, try to optimize and make it more intuitive. And apart from that, the seats are a little bit firm, as with most BMWs, but that's a little bit more of an objective personal take. On long drives, that support that it offers is definitely pretty useful. So overall, I think for 100 grand, if you have the money, I would definitely recommend you have to check this car out. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe if you're new here. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook. We always post pictures, questions, stories, and you can see a lot of behind the scenes content as well. It's me and Jonas signing off. We'll see you next time.